Welcome everyone, friends. Today we begin the new course, MASR08, Sustainable Development Goals and their implications for science-religion dialogue. This course is a special addition to this cohort. For the first cohort, we did not have this program, it was something else. We thought this is most rewarding to you. And this program particularly has some practical implications also. That is how our late faculty, Professor Reginald, has designed it. So this course is taught jointly by our faculty, Professor Reginald, Gerald Grudson, Merita Grudson, Bob Graf. So, welcome everyone. I don't think Professor Reginald requires a particular introduction. He has been accompanying us since the beginning of this program. Anyway, for formality's sake, if there are any freshers, Professor Reginald obtained his PhD from University of Oxford. And sorry, Reginald, what exactly was the area of your PhD, topic of your PhD?
Yeah, it's the response of faith-based institutions to fighting poverty.
Okay, very good. In the Kenyan context, I guess. That is
Right.
okay.
Right.
Also, he has his specialization in governance, globalization, rural-urban development, and economic and development theories. He is very much an activist and researches in this field even now, and conducts research on poverty development and focus on the grassroots issues. Okay, and he has supervised numerous PhDs and master's theses on topics such as health services, community transformation, conflict resolution. And he has collaborated with several universities and NGOs, including the United Nations and international organizations on various development initiatives. Apart from his PhD, he has his MPhil from University of Wales and his MA in Development Studies from the Institute of Development Studies in Hague, Erasmus University in the Netherlands. And I don't go into further details, needs a lot of time. Half the session will be required to introduce all his credentials. I hope all of you are already familiar with the entire academic and research background of Professor Reginald. Thank you, Professor Reginald, for taking this extra pain for preparing this course for our students. We very much look forward to reaping the maximum and the best out of it. Over to you, Reginald.
So thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm very happy to be part of this class. One of the courses I teach this semester is the dialogue between religion and science to master students, and some of them who are entering the PhD stream. So we do it just like an introductory course to stimulate thinking, stimulate discussion. So what is important for us is to see how this course then connects with our own experiences, how this course helps us to integrate what we already know and what we need to know in various professions that we uphold. We have always wanted to understand how religion and science can add value to sustainable development. And because of that, we are following the international debates that exist that help us to reflect together. And you'll see very clearly when you hear the lecture by Professor Grudson, the lecture by Marita. Last year, Professor Augustine, myself, Marita, and Gerard were together at the World Parliament of Religions. And we had a very good session on the same. How people who work in different fields are able to participate in helping the world to be a better place. But which better way can we do that without having this dialogue between religion and science. And so I strongly believe that the dialogue should be enhanced and that each one of us should be actively involved. So to help us reflect on the dialogue between religion and science with SDGs, we're going to have a bit of a general overview, a general introduction on what SDGs are, why are we so keen that religion can play a role? For example, now SDG number 1 talks about poverty. Who can give us the discussions and reflections on poverty so that we can maybe reduce global poverty? There's a lot of literature on that, especially when people talk of poverty. What kind of poverty are we talking about? Is it just material? Is it political, economic? Is it about technology? Is it about the different theologies we have that require more research? So we need to find that. But from the SDG perspective, we are talking about material well-being. And how do we define that? Then we are going to look at the second SDG that looks at hunger. But then hunger and poverty, how do we answer that? And then if you look at poverty and the hunger, and then you look at SDG number 13 that talks about climate change and the disturbances that help us to reflect on how human endeavor is affected by climate change. And therefore, if we continue that way, it's going to generate into poverty, and poverty can also lead to hunger, and then hunger will lead into death, and death will lead into destruction of human life. So we start reasoning like that. And so as students of religion, I said, then how do we respond? Then there will be a bit of the theories that help us look at the ethics, the principles, and the values. And then we have to pick out theories that can help us enter into our debate. The last part of the class will be looking at what kind of methodologies do we introduce. I like integral methodological pluralism because it brings the convergence of different disciplines. And if you listen to what we have had in the last year, from January up to now, there's been an enriched high level of classes. The previous professors have educated us a lot. I'll touch very briefly on that because we want to enter into this discourse. And therefore, for the plan, this is what I have prepared. So today I'll do the class, and then next week. So when I'm giving the general dialogue is how do we reach the sustainable goals from the Millennium Development Goals? And what has been the role of faith-based groups in pushing this narrative that we have enough in the world, but it doesn't go around to everyone. And then also understanding the different actors who have tried to push the Sustainable Development Goals from the inception, 1987. The story of Chico Mendes is very good to discover some of the heroes in this area of sustainable development. Chico Mendes was an activist of the Amazon, murdered on 20th of December, 1988. And because of that, giving birth to Rio, the Rio discussion. Rio would not have happened, perhaps, if Chico Mendes has never been murdered in Brazil. So the awareness of activists in the world is very, very important for this class. And then looking at the key debates that are emerging today, for example, Laudato Si and the Fratelli Tutti, the 1967 encyclical by Pope Paul VI that talks about Populorum Progressio, the progression of the human life, the human value, where the debate then was that people were becoming very materialistic, that every Christmas you have to equip your house with the new furniture. So what do you do with the old furniture? This still happens. What do we do with the car I bought last year? Those are the cars that are donated to developing countries, maybe to wipe their tears or just to make them feel that we care, but that's really sustainable. Then, of course, Professor Gerard will come in. Marita has very interesting experiences with the work she does. Professor Bob Graff, I'm sure he'll have something to share. We have been discussing what he'll do. And then the last two will be now looking at the ethics. And so the books I'm making reference to in most of my discussions are these two. The first one is environmental ethics. The other one is the Oxford Handbook on Religion and Science. This one of Oxford Handbook, it kind of goes, reflects on what Professor Augustine has done, and then the other scholars. For example, Hindu and science, Islam and science, Christianity and science, atheism and science, you find it there. But then in the environmental ethics, we begin now to see the application. For example, how did St. Thomas Aquinas address environment? And what's the value of environment to humanity? What happens today if we cut all the trees? And then the lungs of humanity cannot push in oxygen, then what happens? We disappear. Even this current narrative coming up that perhaps Venus had life, but then there was the destruction of forests by who we don't know. And so when the forest, the natural environment disappears, then oxygen disappears. And where there's no oxygen, there's no water. Where there's no water, you have desert. So those narratives. Okay. So what's really the question we want to look at? And where can we start from? So I always start listening to what Albert Einstein said, that religion without science is blind and science without religion is lame. So that's convergent. This is what we have been learning in the last few classes. That convergence, the dialogue is very important. The other point of entry is the COP27 conference that took place in Cairo last year. And some of my friends were there. And that took place 2022. Some of my friends were there from Nairobi. They went to Cairo. They participated in this conference. There was a great human cooperation to host the delegates. My delegates were hosted by the church in Egypt. And the church in Egypt is directly, especially the Catholic Church, directly under the Holy See. And so it was very easy to bring young people there. The collaboration was good, but then the debate was about climate change and its effects. And it's what Gutierrez said that was very important for us, that if the global climate change goes beyond 1.5 degrees temperature, then we're in trouble. Then what happens? And you'll see a lot when Marita shares some of the experiences. Then we are coming to discuss about the integral ecology. Integral ecology, what does it mean to us? So in Laudato Si reads that the climate is a common good belonging to all and meant for all, and recognizes that studying SDGs is important because climate change is a global problem with grave implications. There's environmental, socio-economic, political, and for the distribution of goods among all people, and laments that the poor, who are the least responsible for causing the problem, are disproportionately vulnerable to its harmful effects. Then during the World Parliament of Religion, the preparations, they were quoting United Nations Environmental Program, which is located here in Nairobi. And I represent the Catholic professionals at the UNEP discussion, Catholic professionals in Africa on this particular forum. So what are we discussing? We are discussing how the religious groups can add value to the thinking that exists, that whatever we do, whatever we use the environment should be for the common good, not for a few people. You can't cut down a forest just to benefit a few people. The forest should benefit everyone, meaning the human being, the animals that are there, and then the water catchment area should not be destroyed. If they're destroyed, then we don't have water, the green energy is destroyed. The vapor that comes from the trees to help us have rain will disappear. And so looking at the Sustainable Development Goals will help us enter into this debate. And at this juncture, I would ask each one of us in this class to try and read and study the SDGs. So number 1 to 17. How do you know them? Do you really know them? Do you see how they connect? So very quickly, we can say SDG number 1 is poverty, 2 is hunger, 3 is about health and well-being, 4 is about education, 5 is about gender, 6 about clean water as a common good. SDGs 13, 14, 15 talk about environmental challenges. 16 is about human rights, especially the rights of migrants, the rights of women, the rights of children, people who live on mountains and they have no protection. What happens when there's a landslide? And then all these SDGs are collapsed in SDG number 17 that calls for global partnerships, that all of us should join hands together to fight these global challenges. They're not for one person, but for all humanity to be together. And you know that from 2020 to even now, COVID was a global menace. And so when you look at SDG number 3, health and well-being, there's been a lot of debate on that, to have good health, what do we need to do? What kind of food do we need to eat? What kind of water do we need to drink? And health is not because we don't have disease, but health could also mean that we live a comfortable life where we are happy with ourselves. We know some parts of the developed world, people interpret health differently. Because you have plenty, tomorrow you can decide to have your nose changed. And if it's changed and you're happy about it, say, well, I'm healthy. But then in the long term, can also create challenges to your own well-being. And therefore, when we're also reflecting on this, we need to see what is happening globally. That religion and science adds value to how we look at the world. What kind of world are we looking at? A world that is strewn in fundamentalism. And this fundamentalism can be a danger if we don't address it. And we believe through religion and science, we have that kind of dialogue. So religion and science have created a synergy of ever-changing and at times as adversaries and at times as complementaries. Both are not alternative, but they are not interchangeable. What faith offers cannot be provided for by science and vice versa. So I always like quoting this letter by John Paul II in Centesimus Annus, 1991. And this is also, remember, it was almost 100 years since the production of Rerum Novarum in 1891, when the encyclicals now became the habit of the church, for the church to reflect on what is happening in the new world. But 1991, almost 100 years later, they're beginning to think, okay, what do we need to do now? What have we learned from the past 100 years? So the Pope says, for us to be able to move forward, the social nature of man is not completely fulfilled in the state, but is reached in various intermediary groups, starting in the family, economic, social, political, and cultural groups. This cannot be fulfilled by reading scriptures only and looking for answers there. However, with the inclusion of science, a great synergy can emerge, bringing about positive contributions to human endeavor. When religion claims 100% protagonism, then we have phenomenon of fundamentalism. So we get the Boko Harams telling us, the Swahili word for things not being straight is haram. So Boko Haram, what is this Boko Haram? The book is not legal. Reading is not legal. So we have people, but then you're using mobile phones and using the gun that has been developed by science. So what are you saying? Yeah. When science excludes the presence of faith in human life, scientism occurs. That is an ideology which claims that science can solve all human problems and excludes all types of transcendence. This is just the opposite of fundamentalism. And so I just wanted to do a quick run through what we have covered so that we are not lost, so that when we are talking about SDGs, the environment, the pollution that is there, we know where we're coming from. So a very quick synopsis of some of the lectures that were covered by Professor Augustine and the others. This is very important for me because when I look at the universe and the creation, the galaxies, I need to see how the cosmos interacts with the human life. And there's a lot of study there. I know there was a lot to be done, but then most of it you have to do it yourself. But I'm always curious when I'm reading the holy books to understand how do they interact with the reality. But then for me, the greatest theologian of this is Alexander of Oregon, or Origen of Alexandria, who used science to understand Genesis narrative of creation as both scientific and faith influence. And the questions we need to be posing all the time when we see this is that, first of all, we are not God, so we will try to interpret the mind of the Creator through science. And so when we read, for example, Genesis, and we look at the first day, what does it mean to us? It was shared very well in the last few classes, and I've been reflecting about it. But just for recap here, one day in Genesis, what does it mean? When we are talking of 13.8 billion years, what does it mean? So when does the light come? When you're reading now the Bible scientifically, when does the light come? So God creates the sun on the fourth day. So what does it mean then the other days? When we say, let there be light, and there was light. Day one, day two. Can you have day one, day two, day three without light? These are questions you should be asking as students of science. The other one that captured my attention when Father Augustine was sharing this, the dark matter, dark energy. As human beings, all the universe, the galaxies put together, it's only 5% that we know. What about the rest? What about dark matter? Though this film, I think scientists are trying to imagine, the film where the dark matter, the dark energy explodes and is falling in some parts of California. Okay, it's a film, but you can see it raining down. But that little dot of dark energy is stronger than even an atomic bomb. What do we learn from that? This image was also very important for me when Father Augustine shared how the Big Bang influences how we look at the universe. This was also very good for me. Then we're looking at the timeline. Some of us have watched the movie Jurassic Park, which is good. But which period was that? So there are these Mesozoic periods, namely the Triassic period, between 250 and 201 million years ago, the Cretaceous period, between 245 million years ago, the Cretaceous period, 145 million to 60 million years ago. So imagine 66 million years ago, we had things called dinosaurs. So what happened during that time? That today we have fossils of dinosaurs hidden in our earth, in our environment. What happened during that period? So students of religions, we should be able to understand this period and then see how human life has evolved over time to be what we are. How creative thinking has helped us to go back very many years. Remember then they did not have mobile phones. They did not have modern tools. But because of entering into the curiosity mind, we're able to discover tools that can help us enrich our understanding. And so when we're looking at today, we need also to see in this spectrum what has happened over the years. The Paleozoic, the Mesozoic era, the Cenozoic, where we are now today, what are we trying to what we're trying to understand. And all these, how they relate to issues of climate change, the human endeavor, the existence of the human life, how we grow in knowledge, how we grow in capacity to understand things. And then moving on to how then, when they call the tertiary period, began about 66 million years ago to today. So what kind of life are we seeing that has happened? I lived in United Kingdom, and I was very curious to understand the London Underground. When they were digging, so the railway station, the railway lines under London, when they were digging, they found some places where there was ice. And that ice was as old as 2.6 million years back. But how can ice be confined under the city of London for so many years? It just shows how also while the human person is progressing, also the natural environment is progressing. That is very important. Because all these things tie together to help us have a curious mind. And one of the people who has helped us to develop a curious mind is none other than Pope Benedict himself. And Pope Benedict himself, the last encyclical was very, very inspiring. I've read it so many times. But he introduces two Greek theorists, Prometheus and Sisyphus. And then he calls it technological Prometheanism. Now, they look very complicated phrases, and that has to be for Benedict anyway. Benedict was a scholar. He was a professor of modern theology. There's one time they were looking at the two top scholars in the world, and I think it was for Benedict and I think Chomsky or something like that. They were regarded as the top philosophers of the world. Now, first of all, Pope Benedict talks about Promethean presumption, and we are going to understand who Prometheus is and how the concept of Prometheus influenced Western development in scientific progress. How an act of rebellion can actually inspire science. That's what has always brought some interesting contradictions to me. So this has been one of the signature phrases of the teachings of Pope Benedict. The phrase can be loosely described as a belief in man's absolute self-sufficiency. So Prometheus believes that by myself, I can succeed. I don't need anybody else. And so Benedict writes in this encyclical what they call the letter Caritate in Veritate. And so who is Prometheus? And how has Prometheus influenced Western thinking? So Prometheus was given the permission or the right or become the prefect of controlling fire. But then he decided to disobey the god, and therefore they punished him by chaining him on a rock. And during the day, an eagle would eat his liver, and during the night, the liver would grow again, so that the torture would be eternal. To teach anyone who disobeys that order of gods is a lesson, and more so to supreme god Zeus. So instead of using his responsibility for human endeavor, he was using it for his own selfishness. So that's the punishment of Prometheus. But now, some people say that, you see, human progress comes by contradiction. Sometimes you have to come up with an antithesis in order to move forward. So the antithesis of Prometheus was that after disobeying, okay, he was punished, he repented, and still got back his position. But when he got his position, he had even grown, had even become wiser. Because with the fire, you can now melt iron, can melt gold into what you want. With fire, you can do so many things. So through fire, it's coming up with a scientific knowledge to melt things that you never were able to melt for the good of humanity. So rather than being selfish, Prometheus learned to become a good person. The other one is Sisyphus. So those days, the Greeks were very good sailors, and they were supposed to be controlling the waters and navigating the waves. But then he started misusing his position, who should pass through certain passages, and then the ships would sink. And so God challenged him, and they want to punish him to repent, to see the other side of things. So his punishment was to carry a big rock up the hill. Then once he reaches the top of Mount Kenya or Everest, roll it down, go back again, perpetual punishment. But in perpetual punishment, there is also repentance. But when you repent, you become wiser. So start using now the knowledge you have for the common good. These are the lessons we have. But you see, even here, the internal punishment, there are two very interesting means which show this difficult combination of positive relationship between the divine power, religion, and human power. So you cannot say I don't need science, and you cannot say I just want to use religion alone. No, the two must work together. That's what Pope Benedict is trying to say. But when they're working together, how then do we pull out the positive side of the two to add value to human endeavor? And so it seems that the Greeks envisaged the difficulties in combining harmonious collaboration between faith and science and religion. And so what Benedict is trying to say, that the influence of the myth of Prometheus to Western scientific development comes about in the classic tradition. Prometheus became a figure who represented human striving, particularly the quest for scientific knowledge, and the risk of overreaching or unintended consequences. At one point, Zeus said it was enough and severely punished Prometheus by chaining him on the mountain. And this vow should come eating. So the whole concept of the maybe Western world about punishment and the human endeavor, okay? How do we then come up with knowledge or technology that reduces suffering, reduces punishment? This is the moral side of the story. So what is the moral story of Prometheus? The theme of this story is that there are consequences for everything, the good or the bad. Sometimes you might think, I'm doing the good thing, but you're destroying life. Or you might think, I'm doing the bad thing, but maybe what you think could be bad actually is what could add value to people's life. The people who give up very easily, they don't want to suffer for the sake of others. So the climax of Prometheus, we think, is when Prometheus gave man fire. You see, God is punishing Prometheus for disobedience. The disobedience could have come that he did not ask permission on how to use this fire for the good, but only for his own value. Sell fire to become rich. But then the punishment was like, why couldn't you have used fire for the greater good of humanity? And so the lesson comes out that if we collaborate in our scientific search, we can improve the quality of life. And look at now the progression of using fire from the time of Prometheus, we don't know when, it's a myth, to the modern time. How the scientific knowledge of using heat has generated what we are using today. Now we have even our laptops or mobile phones because of the concept of heat or energy produced from what we do. And so Prometheus became a struggle of a symbol of resistance against what is considered to be the tyranny of institutions, whether ecclesiastical or monarchical or patriarchal. Because in those days, nobody wanted to bring the dialogue between religion and science. And so when Mary Shelley was writing her novel in 1818 on Frankenstein's subtitled The Modern Prometheus, you start understanding why. The people would say, we don't need the church. We don't need religion. It's very oppressive. You know, I'm just being told things that don't make sense. In my stay in Oxford, I interacted with Richard Dawkins twice. And that's when I came to learn that you can be an academic atheist, but not a spiritual atheist. So Richard Dawkins has tried to describe an atheist by giving 7 different ways. Because an atheist should be somebody who can never even mention a creation, because when they say creation, it's coming from God. An atheist should be somebody who cannot even say life, because life comes from somebody you cannot hear. So an atheist should be somebody who cannot relate to anything that is related to God. That's an atheist. The others are just academic atheists. That was Richard Dawkins. My own professor was called Professor Derek Belshaw. He rested during the COVID situation. But Derek Belshaw used to tell me, I can't go to church. Because when I go to church on Sunday, the preachers have not done research, so they're making me look very bored. So we should form our own church of professors, just meeting on Sunday and reading the Bible and praying among ourselves. Now, that is a modern kind of atheism that is emerging among scholars. We don't want to go there. We want to have this dialogue between religion and science. And so, when Benedict called the Promethean presumption, the claim of individual to be radically responsible for producing what he becomes very prominent. And Benedict's observation is apt. Gratuitousness is present in our lives in many different forms, which often go unrecognized because of purely consumerist and utilitarian view of life. Sometimes modern man is wrongly convinced that he is the sole author of himself, his life, and society. in Caritas Veritate 34. You see, I can become a very good scientist. I know how to make bombs, missiles, smart bombs. My only thing is to sell them. Then when the money enters the bank, I can sit on my phone, sitting in Hawaii or Mombasa with my glass of wine. I'm very happy. That kind of a person is not concerned about the value of human life. And that's what Benedict is attacking. And therefore, we have also come across from Islam other scientists who have added value to what we do today. The question of mathematics is very important. From mathematics, we have algebra, but we will also algorithms and all that. We have come across Al-Zarawi, the pioneer in modern surgery, and how this person has added value to people's lives in modern surgery. And so we can come across different scientists that have added value to human endeavor. And so when you're looking at SDG, for example, number 3, that talks about health and well-being, we go into this history. Why should we care about people living? Why would some people care about the unborn, the elderly, those who are sick, who are terminally ill? Why should we care? In some countries, euthanasia is a thing that is common, but again, they also have rules how to go about it. I know I follow the details in the Netherlands very much. And so when we're looking at now the Sustainable Development Goals, which are not very, as a global policy, they're not very old, it's just from 2015. And before 2015, we had the Millennium Development Goals. And so the human person, in their thinking, they realized that the goals are only 7, but when you look at objectives, they're over 100. But why are we not able to reach there? Why are we not ending the human suffering? And so they said, okay, let's concentrate on the document of Sustainable Development Goals as described in 1987, when the UN sat together to do some kind of study to understand how can human beings live in a natural environment without destroying it. And so they called it the Brundtland report, that produced how human beings can live in an environment, use the environment for their own livelihood, but thinking about tomorrow. So the book is called Building Today for a Brighter Future, for a Better Tomorrow. And in this report, what they're trying to show is that, yes, we can use trees to build, but you don't destroy the forest. We can use water for irrigation, but you don't destroy the river. We can use the natural environment for our own good, but without destroying human life. And so when they're looking at poverty, people start now going back to our traditional cultures. For example, the African culture. How is it that you are able to live within the certain environment with animals and you still had enough to feed the rest of the community? But in modern economics, we want to destroy a whole forest to be able to create an economic venture which only benefits one person. The brand name is mine, but not for everyone. In the village, I'm the only one who can afford a car and the electricity, but the rest of the people are poor. And so this kind of poverty is what is being discussed in SDG number 1. And so the faith groups have been meeting many, many times, even before the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, the faith groups had met in New York, just 5 days before the opening of the UN General Assembly. The assembly was starting on 5th of September, the year 2000. The faith group started the meeting on the 27th of August, the year 2000, to reflect on how they are going to approach poverty and how they're going to approach the meanings of things. Now, in my own study, coming very strongly from a Catholic social background, I was interested in alternative thinking. Yes, you tell me this, but what's the alternative? So my master's was to understand alternative development strategies, alternative. So when it came now to my PhD study, I wanted to understand how faith-based groups interact with sustainable development, but especially in fighting poverty. Now, the danger of faith-based groups is that we are there, but we are criticizing the World Bank, but we borrow their theories. We're criticizing the IMF, but we borrow their theories. We're criticizing European Union, but we borrow their theory. Yet, within our faith perspectives, we have very interesting theories. For example, when I was looking at what we talk about absolute poverty and relative poverty, when you go into that literature, what you find out is that, yes, absolute poverty is measured in terms of how many dollars you have per day. $2, you can live on $2, then you're okay. Now they're even raising the bar, saying $6 per day. But then you come to rural Kenya. Part of my literature review was in Kitui, Kenya. So I go to Kitui and I'm meeting these faith-based groups run by the Anglican Church, African Inland Church. There were Catholic groups there. There are some Pentecostal groups. Now, there had been other donors who had been coming to that village for 40 years, pretending to drill water. After 40 years, there were no boreholes. But when the faith groups came together, after just 1 week, they dug the soil and there was water. They were surprised. And so they started thinking, actually, alone we can do it. We don't need people to tell us what to do in this village. So they formed a committee of faith-based group. That was my entry point, and I learned a lot. The other one was that when you're talking about absolute poverty, they were telling me, I was asking them, okay, how many shillings or dollars do you live on per day? And there was an old lady there. I really loved that mama. She looked at me and they said, look at this clever fool. I'm a clever person who is a fool. And then I said, wow. Here I've been caught. How can I be clever but a fool? Meaning that I was bringing my absolute thinking that if you don't have $2 per day, you're poor. I was bringing it to the village. And this lady told me she has never seen money for the last 2 months. Because everything she wants, she has. She has vegetables, she has grade cows for milk, she has goats, she has chicken, she can get her eggs. And so she doesn't have to go to the market to buy anything. If anything, she distributes her food to other families nearby. And she was keeping her grandchildren, about 6 of them. And then there were other neighbors who had died from accidents, maybe disease. So in her home, she had 13 children. So she was asking me, young man, what, you seem to be well read, but you're a fool. And that for me was a turning point in my PhD study. Then I started realizing that, we use a lot of cliches, a lot of theories from the oppressor without criticizing the oppressor. So absolute poverty can be relative because that's how we choose. But for me now, the entry point was that poverty is relational well-being. That for me was a contribution for my whole PhD of 6 years, struggling to read so much. And so people like Desmond Tutu also reiterate the same. Because Desmond Tutu, while in Davos, we'll try and see whether we can find that video maybe next week, is when he says, you people, why are you so worried about poverty when we have enough for everyone? And that's even Mohandas Gandhi repeated the same thing. We have enough to go around. But then it's our selfishness that makes us not have enough to go around. And then the overpopulation, then it produces poverty. So we had to challenge this also. So we quote Malthus, but we never criticize Malthus as a theory. So I was very lucky. I had a professor who was actually a Marxist. And then the first class in masters, he starts talking about overpopulation does not cause poverty. It's a wrong theory. Imagine today, you are living in an estate where you of 10 acres. Then there's an invading army. Then they chase you away and you abandon everything. Then you find yourself in the big city, sleeping on the streets. And then a student from Nairobi goes to that city and they find very many people sleeping on the streets. And then you say, oh, you see, they're so overpopulated. That's why there is dysentery, diarrhea, cholera. Yeah, this is terrible, terrible. Now, the student is the one who is not informed because has not done a situational analysis to understand why are these people on the streets. There is a very beautiful video by Peter Henriot. Peter Henriot is from the Word Concern. He was based in Washington, D.C., a Jesuit priest who has done a lot of studies in Kenya, Zambia, and also some parts of Africa. But Kenya and Zambia, even Word Concern, I think, is still in Zambia, very strong in Zimbabwe, maybe even South Africa. But he uses what they call the pastoral cycle approach to understand society. And in this opening video, what comes out is that if you look at the homelessness in the United States. In his video, he said there were 3 million people who are homeless, especially former military men and women, especially military men. And you can see people walking around the haversack. So in Washington, D.C., they have created a hot soup kitchen, hot soup for this veteran to walk in and just have some snack. And that is there. It's a project the Jesuits value very much. But nobody had ever interacted with these veterans. The people sleep on the streets to understand why. But when this group of Jesuits started to interact with these people, they were surprised. Those sleeping on the streets, some of them were engineers, were physicists, they were pilots, but because they had gone to one come back, they lost everything, and now they find themselves on the streets. And therefore, you're looking at this large population of people on the streets, and you're saying overpopulation causes for poverty. Have we analyzed the social problem behind it? So we start now entering into dialogue of how to understand sustainable development. The sustainable development is not just about climate change and then we stop there. Not just about fresh water and we stop there. But we need to go into the ethics of it. And therefore, I brought in the story of Malthus to help us enter into this discussion I'm trying to introduce today. But now, when we start going into the basics, we're able to see better. And I'll repeat it again later. But I like the Malthusian theory to help us start critiquing what we read. And so, when you read about Robert Malthus and the family, they were aristocrats, they were very rich. Even Malthus later on became a reverend. But he never sat down to analyze why the Irish people were poor, why they were living in settlements, resettlements, reserves. In fact, the Kenya concept of reserves is borrowed from the Irish because we were British colony. And it's a reserve because your land is taken away, then you are corralled in a small place, the gulags of Russia, but then we have the gulags of Kenya during the emergency time, when the land was taken and people are confined. So you go there, people are dying of dysentery, cholera, everything is horrible. Then you are doing research and then you are saying, oh, you know, this place is overpopulated. So that's how we critique Malthus. You can look at it yourself. But the two landmarks is the orange invasion of the Irish in 1700 and then the potato famine of 1849 that pushed a lot of Irish people to migrate to the US. And so some of the questions we can ask then is, why are people hungry? Why are people not able to produce enough? Then we say, because science has not worked well for us. So let us modify the seed that it can produce more. But then nobody has been able to prove that, you know, if you modify the seed out of its natural, the natural environment or natural well-being, it can also be dangerous to the nature that is not modified. And so we have been studying food security, food insecurity, caused by bad weather, climate change, poor farming methods, conflict, over-reliance on some genetically modified organs. But the key study people have always tried to bring in as an example is Monsanto. I know I've had friends who have worked for Monsanto, and Monsanto has a very good way of defending itself. We have genetically modified products. I know groups in Italy that have come to Kenya that try that narrative, but nobody has taught us about the consequences. So some people say, if we have these genetically modified seeds, you plant them, they kill the soil, and next time you cannot plant any other natural product in. So you have to keep on buying genetically modified seed. And that becomes very expensive for poor people. So when you talk of hunger, then what are we talking about when you talk of hunger? What is our entry point? And so, having given that short synopsis, I'm beginning to think and ask, so then how does science and religion have this dialogue with SDGs, or how are SDGs influenced by science and religion? What do we need to know? We need to understand the environment, what we mean by environment. When you look at SDG 13, 14, 15, what does it mean to us? So the combination of elements whose complex interrelationships make up the settings, the surroundings, and the conditions of life of the individual and of society, as they are so felt. The environment could be a parcel that renders stream of beneficial services and stream of goods and services rendered by real income, houses, infrastructure, transport, and other. Right now, I have a student in my PhD program here in Tangasa from the High Court. And when they were trying to think of a research, I remember meeting some judges of the High Court. And they said, now we are so unhappy with many rulings about built environment because many poor people are not able to defend themselves. Then they bring cases to court. Somebody has forged a land title deed, and the people are being pushed out. But I, as a judge, I remember this judge telling, as a judge, I feel very, very frustrated with this kind of situation. So nowadays, I always ask students like you from Tangaza to do some research for me about the piece of land, bring me evidence, then I can do a better ruling. So they've set up a team with this student of mine in Tangaza to do what they call just environment studies. That when you build your house, you're building on your land. When you build your house, you're not building on landslide. When you build your house, you know that this land is not owned by a certain tycoon who lives in maybe Qatar or lives in Morocco or doesn't exist but belongs to a certain person. So you do search, due diligence to understand what you're buying. So the environment then becomes a very important entry point to sustainable development goals. Then we ask, what is development? The application of human, financial, or physical resources to satisfy human needs. We can even pause there. Then you say, how do you satisfy human needs? Can human needs be satisfied? Or when can I be contented? By modifying what appears in front of me. As long as it benefits me, then I'm okay. If it does not benefit somebody else, then that is their problem. But now, connecting with Prometheus, Sisyphus, the Greek mythology, we say no. When you talk of development, should add value to people's lives. So, development is not just applied to industry, commerce, infrastructure, to sanitation, education, medicine, health, housing, national parks, tourists, recreation facilities, but should also add value to the human person. Okay, I don't want to go into this, but I want to know if there are any questions. Are we communicating? That might be my first question. Are we communicating?
We do, Reginald.
Yes, we are.
I want to hear your feedback.
Okay.
Sister, tell me, what is
Yeah.
intriguing for you so far?
For me, I'm thinking when you're talking about religion, science, and SDGs, what comes to mind is the SDG within the migration. I'm not remembering which number is that. Migration and refugees. Yeah,
Yeah,
15, by the way, 15.
15.
So I'm just
15.
looking at it and I said to myself, when you look at how does religion itself, which is faith and hope, protect these migrants or these refugees? And scientifically, when you look at it, and now you brought about the first medicine person from the Islamic, actually we did him when I was doing the religious dialogue. So you're bringing the element of the, let's say like the health part of it. How does the science, which the science is like the environment, God creation, the things that we can always look at it and we say, wow, the wonder, how does it connect with the religion, science, and all these refugees and migration to give them hope. Because science is a discovery for me that I believe brings to hope. For example, if there is medicine that is discovered, it gives hope of healing. And also religion within itself by giving us hope according to the scripture, according to the Quran, whatever book that gives us hope. How is it now connected with this SDG, giving these refugees and migrants hope? Yeah, that's what is going in my mind.
Thank you.
But
At least,
actually, it's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Asante.
So, in the remaining few minutes, I just want to introduce you. Then when we meet next week, we're able to look at more interesting examples. So every time we talk of sustainable development goals, we need to look again at the history and how it has progressed and who has enriched it. During my time in Oxford, we used to do, whenever there was an event, we would act it. And so I remember acting Billy Graham speaking in 1972 at a World Forum when he was talking about our common future. And he's talking about our common future is destroyed. Our common future is infiltrated by acid rains. And so if we don't fight for our common future, we are gone. We are gone. And I think his message was very influential because it inspired the Brundtland, who was the Prime Minister of Sweden, I think, or Norway, Sweden, to come up with this research from 1972, which ended in 1984, and then it was turned into a book in 1987. It was a reflection how the world had tried to transform itself after the Second World War from the atomic energy, atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to the time now they're talking about acid rains. Acid rains were raining out in the European states, the Scandinavian countries. And so when you have a farm, you find that your food crop is destroyed by acid. So you say, no, we cannot be behaving like this. We need to do an about turn. And our about turn then would be to be more responsible. And I brought in this because that conference of Stockholm, 1972, also gave birth to moving the UN from creating a United Nations environmental program, not in Stockholm, not in New York, not in India, but India supported Kenya to have the United Nations environmental program in Nairobi. So one of the key organs of the UN is based in Nairobi. It's important. And because of that, it generated research. But there could not have been better research than the destruction of the Amazon during that period. People are just destroying the Amazon. If we had time, we'd watch some of the videos how the destruction was taking place. So here were poor farmers, poor peasants, using the forest to harvest rubber, which was then sold to make tires in the US and other parts of the world. But then somebody decided to come in with investment in the name of development. They put in a factory, cut down trees to have a factory to be harvesting rubber for themselves. they cut down trees to have ranches. So we used to say, if you eat a McDonald's, then you're eating the injustice of the Amazon. That's what we used to say. So we used to say, oh, we don't eat McDonald's, don't eat this and that because of that. But then in reality, it was that these people were being marginalized by the ranchers, and therefore they could not compete favorably. So a man called Chico Mendes then comes up and says, no, we can still coexist without destroying what we have. But it was gunned down 1988. And because of that, then the Rio de Janeiro 1992 brought about a different perspective. That's when you start hearing of sustainable development. Sustainable development that is good for us today, but also there to benefit life tomorrow. Then if that happens, then what do we need to do? Then we need to improve on biological diversity. So biodiversity, that's an umbrella term to describe collectively the variety and variability of nature, the biological nature. If you say we kill all insects, then what will eat the fodder to enrich the soil? If we say, somebody used to say, oh, we have come up with a new medicine or we have come up with a new mosquito that can eat other mosquitoes. And then they say, but wait a moment, have we done it right? The US did not have malaria, but now it has malaria. How come? What have we not done right? So it encompasses three basic levels of organization living systems: the genetic, species, and ecosystem levels. And so when you talk of an ecosystem, then we need to understand what that means. The plants, animals of an ecological community and the environment, how they interact with the system, activities, function regarded as a unit. There are innumerable ecosystems: marine, freshwater, terrestrial, forest, grassland. All ecosystems together comprise a biosphere, that part of the Earth's crust and atmosphere inhabited by living things. Ecology is the study of the relationship between an animal, a plant, and its surrounding. In fact, sometimes we used to do a study of what they used to call the biomass, the biological connectivity of things. That if you are in an environment where there are so many rats, you are sure to find snakes. Because snakes will fit on rats. But where there are very many snakes, you're bound to find eagles. Eagles, or they like eating snakes. But then the human person is affected by the surrounding that is there. And therefore, if we start, you kill rats, then the snakes will start invading your home. You kill snakes, then what will the eagles do? So that balance of nature, that's what we are trying to emphasize here. And therefore, when we are talking about the environment, we need to understand in totality the interconnectedness of the biological systems, the ecosystems, and how to coexist within it. And nowadays we know that if we cut down trees, we don't improve on our oxygen content. And then if we cut down trees, we also affect the water catchment areas. Now we know. And you go to traditional culture, especially in Kenya among the Samburu, they have a philosophy called Naath philosophy. And it helps people to think. There is also Maat among the Kalenjin, Maat among the Tugen, where you coexist with nature without destroying what is there. And so the Brundtland Commission brought about this understanding on how to coexist. And if we coexist and utilize what we have favorably, then we can bring about the culture of sustainable development. And so as we reflect on the UN 17 global goals or sustainable development goals, which were agreed upon in 2015, as to create a new world order where we replenish what we had lost with the Millennium Development Goals. that we can come up with 17 goals with over 200 different objectives. What does it mean? If we just take one, you see, my PhD was based on just one, understanding how faith-based groups interact with poverty. And those enormous knowledge. I came across books I would not have read. For example, by Narayan. Narayan is a very famous Indian scholar who had worked for the World Bank, but wanted to look for alternative models on what we know. So Narayan then comes up with this book on poverty, where the book like The Poor Also Cry. And there, they're looking for models of how people describe poverty. And that was very fascinating for me. They did a study in Kenya, and they went among pastoralists. They asked them, what is poverty to you? Now, the voices of the people, poverty was lack of grass. What is poverty to you? Oh, I could not get a basic dress for my wedding. There was a discussion in India, the same Narayan, interviewing people. So what for you is poverty? He said, oh, I did not have a sari to wear for my friend's wedding. And so upgrading that, then they come up with the 17 goals instead of 7. And therefore, this is what we are trying to look at. And this is what we're trying to study. And as we go through that, maybe next week, and then what will be shared, we'll be looking for models that people have used to try and fight back to improve quality of life. That is what we're going to hear more when Professor Gerard, Marita share. And then we be looking at then how do we interact with this space, or we as students who are in the postgraduate program, how then we use this knowledge to add value to our communities where we come from, to where we live. But Augustine, I want to stop there so that we have
Professor Reginald, do you see the questions in the chat box?
let me see the question. I'm trying to make sure that I see. There's somebody from Luya land, The Luya tribe from Western Kenya have traditionally placed a strong emphasis on environmental conservation. Okay. A value that is rooted in their belief, interconnectedness of all living things. The philosophy is reflected in the practices, sustainable farming, and management and protection of the sacred sites, such as forests, rivers, and all that. That is true. I'm a Luya myself, so I understand exactly that. And then they used to do skip farming. So this year we farmed here, but the next year we're not going to farm there. We leave the land hollow so that it can gain its richness and then continue farming. But in a commercial world, we tend to add in manure, add in fertilizer, destroying the soil. And that's why people are going to organic farming. So traditionally, we used to do a lot of organic farming. Is there any other question I'm not seeing? There is a theory that most people are poor not only because of greed and selfishness, but also due to ignorance of dynamics of the money economy. Now, again, in religion and science, we don't say people are ignorant. Maybe people have not been exposed. Like today, I could be ignorant because I do not know the next rocket that can take me to live on Mars. If I want to go to Mars now, I cannot go. So how do we measure ignorance? You know, that's another question. Or we used to be told people are primitive. Say, no. Nobody is primitive, just that we're not exposed. Yeah. The more you interact with the people, the more you grow in knowledge and stature. And the knowledge and stature is acquired through research. So if you're not exposed, how would you be? I think there's a very interesting debate, the debate about the discovery of oil in Iran. And so Reza Mohammed, whose family later became the king, the Shah of Iran, they are arguing with a British investor. The British investor is telling Iranians that, you know what, even if you tell these people that this product is useful, they would not know the value of it, that is oil. And therefore, don't tell them anything. But Reza answers, the one who is not telling them what it should be is the one who is the fool, the ignorant one. Because you should tell them that this will add value to their life because it's oil. But not to say because they don't know the value of oil, therefore they're ignorant or foolish, then it's you who is foolish. It's a very interesting discussion. I should look for that extract. It carries a whole conference. Every year they have a conference on that, on ignorance. So I wouldn't say ignorance, no. And the Shete, you are my friend, you know that. Any other?
Yes, I know, I know.
Yes, Shete works for the Jesuits, so I know. Okay. Anything else coming up,
The
or
next-
somebody? Yes, yes, Augustine.
Did you respond to Wycliffe, Reginald?
Yes, I think
Oh, sorry,
Wycliffe
sorry.
Musinga, Hallelujah, yeah,
Ah, yeah, okay, thank you.
yeah.
Anybody
Yeah,
else? Any comment you wish to make?
Reginald, one thing
Yes, go
you
ahead,
didn't
Professor.
discuss is how do global capitalism and SDGs connect, if they do at all? Because it seems like global capitalism is more powerful than anything in the UN, and it's what affects decisions. Africa now is drowning in debt and trying to work through its debt to create a sustainable future. But global capitalism has immense power, and how does that relate to the SDGs?
Yeah, very interesting question. This semester we have a PhD class on governance for social transformation, and we are using the world systems theory. And in the world system theory is by Immanuel Wallerstein, written 1974. Wallerstein is responding to independent Africa 10 years after independence, especially countries like Kenya. And then he's arguing that, you know what? You people got political independence, but not economic independence. Just because you're colonized by the British, what you have done is economically, you're not free. And because of that, you are depending on the core. So Kenya becomes a periphery and Britain becomes the core. So when Britain coughs, we catch a cold. And therefore, in global capitalism, what happens is that the investor is the one who calls the tune. And in my study, that's exactly what I was critiquing. Why should the investor be the one calling the tune? But now there's a resurgence in Africa, especially with the former French colonies, where they're rebelling against capitalism of the French. But the only tragedy is they're chasing out the French and the Americans and allowing the Russians to take over. And so that's a tragedy. And therefore, while we are studying how it relates to SDGs, that the investors will come to our countries and say, you know what, we are going to have clean energy, we're investing in clean engines, you buy our products, and then you'll live a happy life. No, that will never happen. So we are influenced by globalization, which is controlled by those who have money, the Bill Gates of today. We are talking about, even now, Africa is exporting soil to Qatar to turn their land green. In Tanzania, even they're just carrying all the gold with all the soil to be cleaned out there. So we need to start thinking back and say, no, why can't we develop locally? So capitalism is influencing our modern economies, but there's what you call the core and the periphery within the world systems theory. Yeah, thank you. And next week, we'll be able to see 1 or 2 videos by Desmond Tutu, and then also by Winnie Byanyima. Winnie Byanyima used to work for Oxfam, now she works for UNAID. And she was talking about the misrepresentation when we are discussing sustainable development goals. Misrepresentation is that you do not know anything, so I'm here to tell you what you should do. But then in this class, we are saying there has to be dialogue. If there's no dialogue, we're not going to enrich each other's perception of what we see. So it's the value addition as people who are in this class, value addition. Yes, it's good, but I can also add value to it because I want to ethically understand how this will benefit all of us and not one person. Yeah, it's very important. Thank you.
Reginald, when the class we have on ethics, I'm going to be looking at the role of the Parliament of Religions and all religions in developing a global ethic. Because that's what's lacking, is the capitalism has an ethic more of exploitation of natural resources for benefit, for economic benefit. Whereas what we need is a global ethic. So we'll discuss that in the class, third class.
Right. And I'm looking forward to that. That should be very exciting. Yeah, very interesting. Okay.
If there are no further interventions, shall we call it a day for now?
Yes, maybe we meet next week. So please,
Okay,
the
bye for
assignment-
now, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Reginald, for that
Thank you.
comprehensive introduction. We look forward to more insights from you.